Hello. The Divine Code reading for February 1st, pages 477 and 478. We are in the chapter Categories of Sexual Partners and Sexual Acts that are Forbidden. Topic number 8. A Gentile man is permitted to marry his ex-mother-in-law. Nemuka Yosef on Tractate Yevamot 98. After his wife dies or is divorced from him, if he marries a woman and her mother at the same time, it is not forbidden by Torah law, but it is an abomination, as stated in topic 7 above. So, in the case of the woman and her mother, or the woman and also the mother-in-law, it would be forbidden in Jewish law. It would be, even though it's not a forbidden in the Noahide law, it is considered an abomination, as it's part of the categories of forbidden relations in Torah law for a Jew. So it would not be a liability in a court of law, but it would still be considered a disgusting practice. However, once the man is divorced or a widower, then the mother would be permitted, because it's not together at the same time. Within Torah law, a Gentile man is not forbidden to marry his maternal or paternal grandmother. Therefore, in that case, this may or may not be considered an abomination. From what I understand, it's forbidden in Torah law, but it would not be a liability. It would not be a court issue regarding Noahide law. A Gentile man is permitted to marry his uncle's ex-wife, his brother's ex-wife, or his son's ex-wife, if she was either divorced or widowed. Rambam and Nemuke Yosef on Tractate Yevamot 98, Shulchan Aruch Yoreh De'ah 269. So in the case, this again are cases where in the Jewish law, from what I understand in the Jewish law, these would be forbidden. Therefore, the question would be, is it permitted within Noahide law? It would be permitted, but again, it might be under the case of an abomination. That would be better for clarification, because we were stated earlier that the mother-in-law would be considered an abomination. Pun not intended, but these other categories it's not stated whether or not it's an abomination. The assumption would be that it might be. Torah law permits a Gentile man to marry his niece. For this is even permitted from the onset for a Jew. See Rambam, Laws of Forbidden Sexual Relations 2:14, and Shulchan Aruch Even HaEzer 2:6. From Tractate Sanhedrin 58b, this also applies to Gentiles. So this might be, again, I'm not familiar with the Jewish law regarding this, but it might be that this is a rabbinic prohibited, and because it's that extra degree of separation between the laws, it would not be considered an abomination for a non-Jew, because it's not part of the Torah law for a Jew. It's rather it's a stringency that the rabbis placed upon the Jewish people. And it also permits a Gentile man to marry two sisters. See Rambam and Nemuke and Joseph on Tractate Yevamot 98, who proves this from the fact that Jacob married two sisters in Genesis chapter 29. Jacob married two sisters. We see from that that it would be permitted for non-Jews. It would be prohibited for the Jewish people to marry two sisters. But it's not even really considered an abomination because we see that Jacob did this. And therefore it would be permitted. Therefore, it creates an exception to the question of whether or not it's an abomination. So we know that certain, for a man to marry is a woman and her mother would be considered an abomination. We're not told for sure if the maternal or paternal grandmother, the uncle's ex-wife, brother's ex-wife, or son's ex-wife, whether or not these would be considered abominations. We're not told. We're told it's technically permitted. And in the area of the niece and the two sisters, it would be permitted and would not be considered an abomination. Topic number 9. The relations considered in topic 6 through 8 above are not forbidden for Gentiles within Torah law, and they are therefore not liable to punishment for any of them within the Noahide Code. So there's this category of mitzvahs, this category of relations are technically permitted and therefore would not be a case of capital punishment in the court of law. If Gentile societies see a need to impose upon themselves extra restrictions and enforceably prohibit some or all of these relations, they are permitted to do so. See Tractate of Avodah Zarah, 36b, and Tosafot Sanhedrin 56a. See also Rashi on Genesis 34:7 in regard to the rape of Dinah, and Ramban on Genesis 38:24 in regard to how Judah judged that Tamar should be executed before he was told the true facts of the case. See Likutei Sikot. See Likutei Sikot, volume 5, pages 147 and 190. So a government is permitted to make regulations. A government is not permitted to say that this would be a Torah law, the regulations be Torah law. But if the government sees a need to benefit society by, for example, outlawing a Gentile man with his niece, or even two sisters, the local government, the local courts can enforce laws saying that's not permitted. That's within their mandate to determine what's best for society. As was explained in part 1, topic 310, and that was under the discussion of adding commandments. We're not allowed to add a commandment. However, the court within their functioning can make regulations for their society. Topic number 10. For every one of the forbidden relations that are capital sins, both the man and the woman are equally liable. Tractate Sanhedrin 57b and Muri there. This applies only to a partner who is of a mature age, who acts voluntarily. But one who is not of mature age or is forced is not liable to punishment. Rambam, Laws of Forbidden Sexual Relations, 1:9, 13, 14, 17, and 18. So the person would have to be a person that can be held liable by a court. So a minor or a person who is incapable of making proper decisions would not be held liable in a court of law. And so those or a person that's forced would not be held liable in a court of law. The only thing a person would be held liable in a court of law in the area of being forced possibly would be in the case of murder, where a person should give up his life rather than murder another person. But in any other category, it would not be considered a court concern, or within the Torah distinction. There might still be regulations involved. They may decide that for the safety of society, that a minor or a mentally incapable person would be isolated from the rest of society in cases where it's deemed necessary, but not as part of a court Torah prohibition. This applies only, the woman who is raped by a forbidden partner is not liable to punishment. In contrast, how could a man be considered forced to act as an active partner in sexual intercourse because the male's erection only happens willfully? That is, if the man desires the relations. This can apply if forcers convince the man that they will kill him unless he has forbidden relations. That is, forbidden with a forbidden relative or married woman. And there was cases in some countries, in Libya and other countries, where part of the army function involved raping women. And there was a concern that if a soldier did not want to participate, but the other soldiers threatened to kill him if he did not participate, would he be held culpable for being part of that activity? And that's what's being discussed here. He would not be considered culpable if he honestly thought that his life was in danger if he did not participate. However, it would still be an honorable thing for him to protest. But in these situations, that's very difficult for a person. The man is then being forced to do this, and he is not required to give up his life to avoid it. The Rambam Laws of Kings 10:2. Again, the only area where a man would be required to give up his life is in the case of being forced to commit murder. The Jewish law, it would be prohibited. The man would have to give up his life either for sexual forbidden sexual relations, or for, in the case of idolatry, and that's not required for a Gentile to give up his life in those cases. Only in the case of murder. And it is permitted for him to it is permitted for him to submit to having relations with a forbidden relative or married woman. However, this only applies if the woman consents to having the relations, even if she is forced to consent upon the pain of death. See Minhag Chinuch Commandment 269, Section 4, that even though a Gentile man may have relations with a forbidden woman to avoid giving up his life, the forbidden woman does not have permission to voluntarily submit in order to save him. She is only allowed to submit if she herself is being threatened with death if she does not. And that's normally the case in these kind of cases. The woman is, it would create a difficult question if the man is being forced, but the woman was not being forced. Would the man be permitted to well, in that case, it wouldn't be rape. So I'm not even sure how this fits into this. But the man is being forced, but the woman is not being forced. And that would be another difficult question. But even if the man is being threatened with death, he is not permitted to physically force the intercourse upon a woman against her will, even if she is not forbidden to him by Torah law. Even if she is single and not a relative, the man has no permission to do so, since it would constitute forcible rape, even if he is being forced to do so with the threat of death, if he does not, as explained in part 5, chapter 2. And that's the prohibition of murder and injury. So there's two different laws that are being involved here. One is the law of forbidden relations. The other one is the law of injury, which is under the category of murder. And it's not permitted to injure another person in a serious way. And rape would be considered injuring a person in a serious way. Therefore, the person would not have, if the woman just gives up and she realizes that she's under duress and she is allowing at that point the man who's being forced against his will, and she's allowing at that point because they're both under duress, then it would be allowed under the even under the prohibition of injury, of serious injury. And the man would not be liable. And also the woman would not be liable because she's also under duress. If the woman says, no, I'm not going to submit to this, she has free will, and he's being forced, but she's not being forced, and she says no, then the man does not have, even to save his life, does not have permission to injure the woman, even though the permission regarding forbidden relations, which is the unit we're in, it would be permitted. It would not be permitted under the prohibition of injuring a person. Therefore, in that case, it would not be permitted. The same applies if a man is forced to commit homosexual relations. So the same arguments as to whether or not it is permitted for the man under pain of death, if he's being threatened with death, and whether or not he's permitted to save his life, would be the same as whether it's a man or a woman who is the victim in this case. Topic number 11. If intercourse with a forbidden partner is being physically forced upon a woman, but in the midst of the act, after he had entered her, she began to desire the relations, this does not make her liable for punishment, for once the forced relations begins, it may not be possible for her to hold back from desiring it. Rambam, The Laws of Forbidden Sexual Relations, 1:9. And this would be an incredibly controversial within today's society, where they would argue that does not happen. But if in the case where it would happen, the woman is not liable. The man would be liable both under forbidden relations and also under injury. The man would he would be liable under forbidden relations and possibly under the law, the prohibition of injuring a person. This also applies to a woman who starts having intercourse by mistake. For example, she initially thinks the man is her husband, but in the middle of the relation, she realizes he's another man. So this would be in a very dark situation where the woman just assumes that the man there is her husband, and then discovers that he's not. In the middle of the relation, she realizes that he's another man. She is not liable even if she allows the relations to continue, because she is the passive partner and not the active partner. So because the woman is, if she, in the middle of this, she realizes it's not her husband, she is not liable even if she allows it to continue, because she's not actively doing anything at that point. However, if a man is forced to have forbidden intercourse because he was already erect, and it's not totally clear how that's being forced, unless we're talking about the last topic where it's but it appears to be talking about something different at this point. Or if he mistakenly thought she was his wife and was permitted to him, and during the relations it became known to him that she was forbidden. So again, this is a case where it's dark. He doesn't know. He assumes that the person there is his wife, and it turns out to be someone else. And he realizes this halfway through. Then he should support himself motionless on his fingers and toes, so he derives no pleasure. So this is where he causes himself pain by holding himself up on his fingers and his toes. He's causing himself a discomfort. Therefore, he's no longer enjoying the activity until his erection is lost, and then withdraw. So through that methodology, once he realizes the situation, he stops what he's doing. He supports himself in his fingers and toes, and that causes discomfort. So from that point on, he's not deriving any pleasure from the activity. The man is not allowed to derive pleasure from the activity. The woman, the passive partner, it's not prohibited for her to derive pleasure, but the man, who's the active partner, would not be allowed to derive pleasure once he realizes the mistake. If he does not do so, then he is willfully continuing the act and is not considered forced. That is not of the act. Then his willful continuation of the act is not considered forced, and he is liable. So if he takes himself off right away, he's deriving some measure of pleasure, and that measure of pleasure would be considered enough to be liability against him, and he would be executed by a court of law, which is the reason why by holding himself up by his fingertips and his toes, he does not derive pleasure, and then he would not be considered liable. Rambam, Laws of Forbidden Sexual Relations, 411, Min Kodkina, Commandment 35, states that this is not considered a mistaken transgression. So that last action would not be considered part of the mistake. Everything up until the point that he realizes would be considered a mistake. Once he realizes, anything after the realization would not be considered a mistake and would be liable. Would be a liability in a court of law. Thank you.